To have confidence is one thing, but then you also need to have the skills to back it up. Now, how do you tell if you're skillful enough to be a pro player, if you have the right skills to be a pro player, and what are the right skills to be a pro player? Simply put, looking at it from a very gameplay heavy perspective, skills are the mechanics inside the game which make you a formidable opponent, right? So, in a game like Valorant, it could be your movement, your aim, your game sense, all the categories that come within the game, which I don't want to dwell over because there are different things for different games. For MOBAs, you have uh, your understanding of the agents, which comes under game sense, I believe, your mechanics to maneuver said champions or agents, and for multiple titles, it differs depending on the genre of the game that you're trying to play. So, how can you tell if you're skillful or not? For most professional games that are played today, there is an online ladder or online matchmaking system that exists, right? For Valorant, you have your rank games. For League of Legends, you have your rank games. For Dota, you have your rank games. For CS, you have matchmaking or Face It, or whatever the highest uh, competitive standard is for any game. Now, to know if you're skillful enough to be a professional player means looking at everybody else who are currently professional players and then deciding that am I close to these guys on whatever their stance is on the ladder, and if I am, then I am skillful enough. If most pro players are Immortal 3 in Valorant, then any rank around that, let's say Immortal 1, 2, or Radiant, would be an ideal rank to say, hey, for the game bit of it, I am skilled enough to play. So that is the margin you're trying to reach. That is where you want to be. You want to be around that rank. For Dota, it's anywhere around Divine or Ancient. What's that? The Divine. I think it's Divine, and I think the next one is Ancient or something. I'm not sure. So in CS, we face it level 10. For uh, I'm not sure about the terminologies for different games, right? So you want to look at whether or not you are around those ranks. Now, next question that people often ask me is, hey, listen, I'm this age, I'm 18 years old, I'm 14 years old, I'm 16 years old, and I also study. Now, how much time should I actually put in to be able to become a professional player? How much time should I put in per day? That's the answer that's the question that they have, and they want that answered. Now, while there is no way that I can actually say this is how much you're supposed to play, this is how much you're supposed to game to be able to stand a chance in professional play, there is no concrete way to decide how much time you need to spend. Just like how, if I asked you, how much time should I start studying to clear this competitive exam, right? It's not a question of time, it differs from person to person. It might take me 1 year to study for an exam, that might take somebody else 2 years, might take somebody else 5 years, might take somebody else 1 month. People who are really, really smart. So there's no way to tell you whether or not you will be able to become a professional player if you spend said amount of time. That being said, there have been multiple studies conducted, and I will cite multiple of these. Most of them are from a book that I've read called The Sports Gene, and You can check that out if you're interested. It basically talks about how sports and science, and whether or not there is actual genetic code that differentiates the best athletes from common folk, or can anybody become the best athlete in the world in multiple games. So in that, we have they had made a discovery. I'm not familiar with what the exact name of the research was or when it was conducted, so forgive me for that. But after a series of tests, beginning from basic junior piano players and violinists, they found out that the amount of time you would actually need to actually become decent to good at any art or any sport. They used chess as an example as well. To become good at that, you would basically need to have it's called the 10,000 hour rule, where you actually spend 10,000 hours on that art, on that craft, or on that sport. So, to be at the level of a master, you will need to have at least 10,000 hours. This is for mastery, right? Sure, you might be able to pick it up a lot sooner and master that before, but 10,000 hour is a safe and average estimate to be a master. Now, to be somewhat even greater than a master, even better than most masters, people have spent 20,000 hours, 30,000 hours in total across their lives. They've cited multiple examples of this with people who've played chess professionally, grandmasters who've played chess, people who've played the violin, people who've played basketball, and other multiple examples. So you can check that out as well. So to answer your question, if you want to check whether or not you're a professional player, my advice is put the 10,000 hour rule if you can. Try to get that 10,000 hour rule from whatever time limitations you have. And then if you still aren't good enough, whatever we talked about before, if you still haven't achieved that decent rank, then maybe it's not cut out for you. This is a good estimate. This is not meant to discourage people, but it is at least an idea about where you're trying to work towards. What is your end goal? Because people seem to always look out for that. Now, the next question people usually ask is, how important is your reflexes in the game? I've seen people say that, oh, his reflexes are better than mine, he should be really good at video games. Or a player is solely as good as the reflexes in most competitive games that require real-time input, right? FPS games, mobiles included. So I would like to cite a little study that people did, where they actually took a bunch of candidates and had them do the usual reflex test. You see a green light and you click, and they ranked them based on their reflexes, right? And in this whole shuffle of people, there were a mix of intermediate chess players, beginner chess players, as well as expert chess players. Now, the findings were pretty astonishing, to say the least, because after they did do the ranking of their reflexes, what they would do is they would flash a card for 0.1 seconds or 0.2 seconds with a chessboard on it. Basically, it would be a piece of play on a chessboard that they would have a photograph of, and they would flash it for a minimal amount of time, 0.1 second, 0.2 seconds, and then they would ask the participant what they inferred from that, what they saw. Did they remember where the bishops were? Did they remember where the pawns were? Did they remember where all the pieces were? It turns out that people who are beginners at chess, their cognitive ability wasn't even enough to even place 3 to 4 pieces on the board. The ones who were intermediate, who were actually competing state players, were actually able to reconstruct at least 90% of the board. When they tested out with the veterans or with the grandmasters, not only were they able to construct the board completely, some players were even able to recall which game the board was from prior experience of having actually watched those matches or studied those matches. And it is shocking because in that instantaneous second, no matter how much of information you loaded onto everybody, it was the people who had the most experience that were able to actually recall the whole game and then actually talk, and the best players were even able to identify where the game was from. That's telling you that it's not just about how fast you're able to look at the screen and click, but it's also about how you're able to decipher the information in front of you and use it to your advantage, which is very important in esports because you have limited time to make a decision that will impact the whole round and might impact the whole game. So, to people that think it's all about reflexes, I would really beg to differ. They also tried a similar experiment with baseball players and basketball players, where they would present to them the same photo for 0.1 seconds, and the same applied to these players as well, where they were able to understand what stroke was being played, what shot was being played, depending on like beginner, intermediate, advanced. The best players were even able to identify which games the players they see were from. They would show popular athletes dunking a basketball, they would show popular baseball players hitting the ball, and the most veteran of them were able to identify which game it was from because they had watched the game before. The intermediate players were able to at least analyze, oh, this was the move that he was trying to do. He was trying to do a layup, he was trying to do this. And the beginner ones were not even able to grasp what was happening on the screen. A similar experiment to this was also conducted where they actually used a machine to launch baseballs at a batter and against veteran batters and intermediate batters and beginner batters. And no matter what kind of ball came, the best of the best batters, because it was machine generated, were actually able to hit the ball out of the park. Beginners and intermediates struggled a little, but the intermediates caught on soon, and beginners obviously had a tougher time. While this shows again that experience triumphs, you would also think that it's pretty obvious about something like this happening, right? But then a follow-up test was conducted after this, after certifying who were the beginner, intermediate, advanced players, where they actually would show them a video of a pitcher throwing the ball, and after the ball was thrown, they would actually cut the video and they would ask the participant, where do you think the ball would land? As soon as it left the hand, by the way, as soon as the ball left the hand, they would ask where they thought the ball would land, or which direction do you think the ball would go, or where the ball would end up. The most veteran of them were able to easily predict, just by looking at the motion of the hand as well as the moment it left the ball, as soon as the moment the ball left the hand, for where the ball would go. Beginners would struggle, and the intermediate players had a fair probability of guessing where it would go. So the catch here was that the advice about keeping your eye on the ball is not very good advice, because by the time the ball leaves the hand and actually reaches the bat, the player isn't able to look where the ball is going, react, and then take the shot. It usually happens as soon as the ball leaves the hand. The best batters were able to determine where the ball would go just by looking at the position of the hand. So it's not all about reflexes. It also has to do a lot with the experience of a certain player. And experience comes through time, comes through the grind, and comes through analyzing and understanding as you continue your craft. So, yeah, I hope I've made a strong case against people that think that reflexes are everything. In the same case for esports, if you would show the best players clips or moments of something happening, they would easily be able to identify which pro player was playing, what the game was in that split second, and they would be able to tell based on prior information about previous rounds about where an enemy would most likely hit. And that's why you see sometimes in pro plays people making something that looks like a very random play, a very guess heavy play, but there is some root ability to foresee what might come through. The next and probably last question regarding this topic that people ask me is, can hard work beat talent? I have seen a lot of players in the past and at present always say stuff like, he's blessed with this kind of aim. There's no way we can top that aim. There's no way we can be better than him. There's no way we can be better than somebody like Simple in CS. Or there's no way we can be as good as somebody like Tens. And people say this, and it's very puzzling for me, because this means that people are just rooting all the players' success that they're talking about to their aim. Because the players I just talked about, the main thing that people see is their aim, and they think, we can never replicate that. We can never be as good as them. It's the first thought process that comes to your mind. Citing from the sports gene again, I would like to tell you all a story of two people. One of them is called Stephen Holm, and the other one is called Donald Thomas. Now, Stephen Holm was a Swedish high jumper. He initially started his career, you'd say, from school, where he would try to make the high jump, and he loved the sport so much that he, in the future, he quit a job, a very good job offer that he had, to actually pursue high jump, and he spent years, every day, relentlessly training for the chance to represent his country in the Olympics. He trained every day, and every year his highest point of his jump would increase by a few centimeters. He would keep climbing, to the point where he would start winning somewhat of a, let's say, a Commonwealth equivalent of the Sweden, right? He would win all the local events that would happen. He would win most of the European events that would happen. And finally, he got a chance to represent his country in the Olympics. He actually had the opportunity twice. And the first time, he did not place first, but he made a good stand. And then for the next consecutive 3 years, he did train. He trained harder, and his highest jump grew past the point of whoever jumped the highest in the last Olympics that he lost. Now, he had trained for a decade, or like 2 decades at least, to actually get to the point where he was. Then there was another person called Donald Thomas, who in college bet one of his friends who was in high jump in his college that, what's that, 7 feet, I can jump over it easily, right? 7 feet is no joke. 7 feet is taller than most people. If you watch WWE, the Big Show, and basically you'd have to jump over Big Show, right? Or the Great Khali. Now, Donald Thomas made this bet, and then his friend said, no way you do this, I'm gonna bet you $100. And Donald Thomas that day made $100. But as soon as his friend saw what he was capable of, he reported his friend's success to their college sports head, and even the college sports head didn't believe him because Donald Thomas had no training. Donald Thomas was just another college student who wasn't even into sports. He was just a very lazy kid who had no interest in practice and training. But after persuasion from the sports head and from his friends, he decided to give it a shot, and then he basically qualified in that year itself, in the same year, for the Olympics. The same Olympics, mind you, that Stephen Holm was competing in. And in high jump, there is a certain technique to actually make the jump. There is a way that you jump so that you get the highest height. And Stephen Holm had this down to the dot, whereas Donald did not care. Let's call him Mr. Thomas. Because Donald just sounds a little ducky. So Mr. Thomas went ahead and made these jumps, and without any technique, he surpassed Holm. After the event was over, Holm ended up coming first place. Thomas ended up coming first place, and Holm lost out to Thomas. Even with multiple decades of training, he was beaten by a man who only participated on the same year as he did tryout. And he often skipped practice, saying that it was too boring to practice. But even with that attitude, Donald Thomas ended up winning the high jump in the Olympics that year. Now, most of you are thinking that just reinforces the point of it being a very genetic thing. Now, after the Olympics were over, scientists did try to find out why somebody like Thomas had such an edge over somebody like Holm, who worked day and night. The crux of the matter was in his Achilles heel, both their Achilles heels. While Holm had an Achilles heel that was toughened every day, and the Achilles heel is basically like a spring in your foot. It's on the back of your foot that acts as a springboard for when you jump. So Holm, over decades of practice, grew that small spring that he had, his Achilles heel. He made it tougher, he made it stronger, he made it thicker, as much as he could. But Donald Thomas was born from a lineage, because he had a Jamaican heritage, with very, very wide and thick Achilles heels. There's nothing anybody could do about it. It was something he was born with, and he was able to succeed because of this. Now, you might think, yeah, well, Tenzin, probably, let's say the best players in Valorant, Zaiwu, Simple, for CS, all probably have really good aim because it's genetic. Their dexterity is linked to their genetics. But you're forgetting the point. Valorant, number one, isn't just a 1 versus 1 game. It's not a one-man show. Neither is Counter-Strike, neither is Dota. Most esports titles that are very, very popular right now, apart from Tech and FIFA, are team-based. And with team-based games, it gives you the chance, whether you might not be as mechanically gifted or mechanically skilled as the other person, if you're able to put your head together, you're able to use 5 players or 6 players, depending on what game you play, or 4 players, 3 players, multiple variations for different games. You're able to use that to your advantage and beat somebody who might be more individually skilled than you. So there is still a chance, even if somebody is individually better than you, that you will be able to use your brain and use your tactics and play it in a way that will always ensure your advantage so that you win. I think the moral of the story is that just because you think an opponent is better than you, maybe they're having a good day, maybe you're losing your fights that you would normally win. Don't be discouraged. Don't try to fight and have a ego battle with that player. Instead, find a way with your team to actually cover up for being weaker than them mechanically so that you will end up winning the round. You will not always be better than the other person on the server, but you always have the chance to structure your team in a way that will guarantee success.